We will do that. We spoke several times in the past on the experience of a Baal Tshuva in coming from an other environment and being reared in different orientation and coming into a totally different orientation, and thus there is a certain feeling of estrangement. There's a sense that, yes, I believe in it, it's true, it's good, but I feel like a stranger, like a visitor here. Because more naturally, I belong to my background. This is what I grew up with. So we spoke about this many occasions, pointing out that everyone has to recognize that every Yid belongs in Yidishkait, because Yidishkait is not the property of any individual people. This is the Meibershen's place, and everybody is an equal relative to the Meibershen. I want to speak on this topic, but perhaps more basic, from a more basic level. The human nature is that even if a person does not undergo any kind of dramatic changes in his life, one persists in the normal path, just the way he experienced his childhood, and it proceeds basically in the same direction. Still, that which he had experienced in childhood, he always feels a very special closeness to. Everybody experienced that if you meet someone that you haven't seen for many years, but you have known that person from kindergarten, from first grade, from any times in school age, you feel a certain affinity with that person. As a matter of fact, it goes beyond meeting with people. If one goes back to the town and the street where he grew up, he inevitably feels a certain nostalgia, feels a certain closeness, a certain belonging, sense of reality. Even if the town and the street has changed completely, none of the people that lived there at the time when he grew up are still there. Nevertheless, he feels a certain belonging. And I think it's here. It's here. Maybe it's here. He left? He feels a certain sense of belonging. And therefore, it would seem that wherever a person goes, whatever his experience in his adult life, even if there is no dramatic change, he will never feel as comfortable with his associations in his adult life as with his associations in his youth. Much more so if there was actually a significant change in his path, like he went from a different way of life to becoming a Baal Tshuva, then he will inevitably feel a certain level of discomfort, a certain level of estrangement. And I want to discuss this whole phenomenon And ultimately, I want to point out that I don't believe this is a necessity, necessarily true. If we understand this phenomenon correctly, we will see that it is not necessarily the result in adulthood that one should feel strange, with less comfort than he felt in youth, particularly when it comes to Torah Yidishkait. The basic reason why a person feels a special affinity with his childhood experience is that this which a person experienced in childhood, he did not, as a child, question. He had no filtering. He did not doubt the reality of what is happening. This was something which was a simple reality. This is where he was born, this is his mommy, this is his tati, this is his house. Of course, that's forever going to be that way, because that's the way it is. He did not at all realize that the reason they live in this house is because they pay rent. As far as he's concerned, this is his place in the world. There is nothing really happening extraneously to make it possible. This is just the reality. And thus, a child forms a sense of reality of the things that he experienced in childhood. And therefore, everything else, everything that he comes in contact with, everything that he learns about later on in life is an add-on, is something that he learns about, but not something that is real on the basic level. The basic level, the basic reality is that which he accepted as a child. Everything else, yes, he has to learn other things, but everything that he learns thereafter is what we call, it comes filtered through his intellect. He judges, should I accept it, should I not accept it? And when he accepts it to a certain degree. He accepts it with some trepidations, with some doubt. Let me see, let me taste it. And therefore his relationship, he relates to everything else with some degree of limit, some degree of trepidation, of doubt. This is the normal state of affairs. This is perfectly normal. This is what happens in human life. Clearly, you can be an engineer and not be imbued into it, not feel that you really belong there, but to do the job, and satisfy your requirement. Be a pretty good engineer and do the job. It's not going to hurt your occupation. It's not going to hurt your way of life or anything else. And the same thing applies to any occupation, anything that a person does. He doesn't have to be submerged into it. He doesn't have to feel completely united with it and perfectly comfortable with it in order to do a good job. He can do a good job if he knows what he is doing. But when it comes to a way of life, when it comes to a Yidishkait, something that one lives 24 hours a day, something that becomes the basis for his entire development of his future life, that becomes the basis for raising a family, the basis for um, um, teaching his family and giving guidance to his family, and himself guiding himself in his life. There, if one should continue to relate to it at some distance, not feel perfectly comfortable, not feel perfectly belonging, perfectly well relating to it as a basic truth, as a basic reality, then this creates a discomfort, a simple psychological discomfort, that he is constantly on the watch out. He's constantly on the guard. Is it real or is it not? He has to constantly reconvince himself, yeah, this is real, this is right. This is the way to do it. It's not something that he takes for granted, not something that he relates what we call simply a simplicity of relationship, like a child relates to his way of life.
You also know the difference between why to say to approach the job, for example, it's acceptable, such a halfway of believing in it, right? But with Yidishkait is not
Well, a job does not define the person. A person can change jobs. Just as the place that you work does not make you married to that place, does not relate you to the place. You can change anytime you want. The trade, the path of your activity is the same thing. It doesn't define the person. You go to work and you come home, and that's it. But this is talking about life itself. And it is extremely uncomfortable. And forget about discomfort. It's a necessity in order to develop fully and be able to live a full life, a full unwholesome life, that one can relate to his way of life also in a complete and open and a wholesome way. Without doubt, without trepidations, and without filtering. He feels perfectly at home with it. Even as a child feels at home on the street where he was born. And now the big question is this possible? And I contend absolutely it is possible. Not only it's possible, but it's a necessity, because that's the only way really to live. And then the question is, how is it possible? How do you accomplish it? How can it be? As I mentioned before, I want to discuss the background for this. The comfort that a child feels with his childhood experience is not as it appears, that he feels comfortable with that experience because that experience makes sense to him. It's something that he really believes in. The reason he feels comfortable with his childhood experience is that he accepted it, as I said before, without any doubt. This was something which was part of the reality. In other words, it is not that particular person that makes him feel comfortable. It is not that particular house, that particular street. It is just the fact that there is a reality in the world that he does not have to question, that he does not get to know through some kind of experience. But this is something which is real on a very simple and basic level. Now, in fact, this childhood experience is extremely important in a person's development. Even though it seems childish, but it's extremely important for the health of a person, of his future life. What happens in normal human development is that a child grows up, let's say in normal situations, a child grows up in a certain town, a certain city, a certain house, and he feels very comfortable with it. This is reality. As he progresses and he grows a little bit, and he grows into adolescence and then into adulthood, what should happen then is that he begins to broaden out. What does this broadening out mean? That he recognizes, he realizes that this house that he lived in is not real in and of itself. It does not exist in a vacuum. This house, which he affiliates very well with, which he associates very clearly with, this house is on a certain street. And if this house is real, then the street where the house stands must also be real. Because if the street is not real, then the house cannot be real. That's when the kid starts running back and forth on the street. As he grows a little further, then he recognizes that this street is part of a neighborhood. And he recognizes that the reason that the street is real is because the neighborhood is real. If not for the neighborhood, there would be no street. And then when he broadens out further, he recognizes that the neighborhood is part of the city. And again, the city becomes a basic reality to him. Because if the city weren't real, then the neighborhood isn't real, then the street is not real, then the house is not real. This extends to the country. This extends to the continent. It extends to the whole world. And as one grows into adulthood, ultimately, one has to broaden out and recognize that really the reality of that little house is substantiated, is real only because the world itself is real. If the world is not real, then the house is not real. And he has to grow into, this is what growing into adulthood essentially means. That he grows out from the eggshell. And he recognizes that it's not just this particular spot, but actually the entire base for it, the entire environment for it, also has a reality. And he has to be able to relate to it. as his intellect develops and he begins to think and grow also not only physically, his physical experience, but he grows intellectually. Then he gets to realize and to understand that the reality of the world also has to have a base. There's a greater reality than the world itself. In order for the world to be real, there has to be some basis for this world. This is why we have a very common experience of about tshuva. And it's not all about tshuva. Every individual, as he grows, he asks himself the question, what is this all about? Meaning not what my little house is all about, or my street is all about, my city is all about. What is this, all of this all about? Because all of this is the domain that he lives in. He now relates to the whole world. What is this all about? And this question becomes so fundamental and so demanding that he can't find a place for himself in his own house unless he can make sense out of all of this. So this is where Yidishkait comes in. This is where the Torah comes in. And therefore the Torah and Yidishkait, the Torah says, all of this, you know what this is all about? Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'oretz. God created it. So contrary to the way it sounds at first, that this is just a kind of an academic lesson. Where does it come from? What is it? Who created it? In fact, this is substantiating to the adult, to the individual person, substantiating his very reality. He substantiates his very reality. Because this makes real the whole world. And this sense of reality that the Torah provides, that Yidishkait provides, in terms of the total existence, is so direct and so complete and total and simple that just in the same level of simple relationship that a child has with his little home and his toy room, in adulthood, one has that very simple relationship with the whole world and with the basis for the world, with the very essence and meaning of the world. It is not an academic study. It's not an academic piece of information. The principle that the basis for the world is the Creator, is God. That principle gives a certain simplicity and the possibility of a direct relationship with this total reality. Why is that? How does this happen? As long as there is a big world, meaning there are many things in the world, coming back to from our childhood orientation, there is my house, there's the neighbor's house, which is not my house, and then there's street, which is clearly not my house, and then there's a city. Even though one is based on the other, but still they are not my house. But when one comes to recognize, and this is essentially the essence of recognition, that really it is all one, like we say in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And what is Echad, the principle of Echad? Everybody knows. Echad means that the entire expanse of space, up and down in all directions, is really all one Nakuda, all one source of Chayas. There's not something that's closer or distant, more distant. It's all representing one, the El Aleph. Thus, my own little house and a place in the world thousands of miles away are not any different. I may not be that well oriented, I may not know how to get from place to place, but I feel as comfortable. This is the same place. It's a place belonging to the same owner, to the same creator, as my little house. The same thing is true, as we will see, in terms of space and in terms of time. We have the time, period of our lives of our youth, and we have the time where we become more sophisticated, to be more aware of the passage of time. In youth, time doesn't stand still. It's all one big time. We don't have time. It's just my experience. Then we recognize that time passes, and we have to fill the time with certain activities, and we judge the time on the basis of what did I accomplish in that time. And then there is the present time, and then there's the future time. The future time is the same in terms of human relationship as a strange place that you've never been to. Future time is like a mystery. What's going to be in the future? How am I going to make out? I'm here now, but what's going to be a year from now? How am I going to handle what comes what comes next? And when one looks at that and projects it, again, he feels totally estranged and in total doubt, and almost to the point where he can get into depression, because I was never there. How am I going to face it? What is the connection between what I'm now and what I'm going to get to? This is why there is a tendency, there's a kind of an approach that the Rebbe speaks about it quite often, that parents are concerned about their child. The moment that the child is born, what is the child going to do for a living? And they prepare the child as time from the cradle on. This child, he's going to be an engineer, and everything is geared in that direction. And then he becomes an engineer, and he finishes his life in that path. What happens here is, if we examine this mentality, is that this child actually never steps out of a childish orientation, of the child's mentality. He lives in the prescribed, he lives in this little house where he was born, basically. And that's the only reality there is. It doesn't relate to a reality of the future time. It doesn't relate to the reality of the expense of space or time. But to us, there is oneness in space, and there's oneness in time. Because we recognize, the recognition is deeper than the intellect, but the recognition is there in our Amunah. We recognize that the reason we are here now, and the reason that we have made it till this point, and Baruch Hashem, we are accomplishing what we are accomplishing, we are successful, whatever we're successful. The reason that is true is not because this particular time happens to be successful. It is because of the Creator, because of the truth of existence, the truth of the source of existence, the truth of the Creator, that leads the world from its inception till the end of time. Just as in terms of the space that we understood, that ultimately the child has to go out of his crib and recognize that the reality of the broader world is just as real as the crib. Because he recognizes that what makes things real is not just because I have experienced it, but because it's real by virtue of it being created. If it's true in space, it's true in time. The future time is the result and is rooted in the same reality as the current time and as the past time. Clearly, we have to do everything to prepare ourselves for it. Basically, that we should be able to relate to it correctly and put all we have into it and do things right. But we are not going into, it's like what used to be years ago, when the world wasn't sure whether the earth is round or flat. Even though I want you to know that in the Zohar, in Torah, there was never that. We knew that the earth was round, because the Zohar speaks of the sphere of the earth. But people didn't know. And the going theory was that you go at a certain distance and then you just fall off the earth. And therefore you have to stick to your little spot where you can hold on securely. The same thing is regarding time. If I go beyond my time, who knows? That's the end of time. It's the end of reality. We have to broaden out and recognize and relate to what's called the basic reality, the basis for reality. The same fundamental truth that makes this particular spot where I'm now and this particular time that I'm currently experiencing real, and I can relate to it, and I know this is undeniably real. The reason it's undeniably real is not because I'm experiencing it, but because I recognize its reality. I recognize that there is a basis for its being. There's a creator that makes it be. And therefore I don't have to question it. If it was making itself, then I would question how did it make itself. But since it's being made, then I don't question. Then that's obvious. That same basis exists. That same basis is the basis for all space and the basis for all time. Coming back to the initial point of this discussion, as I said, I want to discuss the principle where when we learn something in Torah, especially if one is about tshuva and had to go through a dramatic change, a fundamental change in one's life, to get into a new phase, a new way of life completely. And that way of life seems to be something that he has acquired from outside. This is not his basic experience. And if it's not his basic experience, therefore it will always sort of feel like something extraneous, something add-on, something strange to him. And this is not acceptable. This is not the way to live. But we have to recognize, and how we have to, and the way that we relate to this new way of life, the way that we relate to this new way of life, and all that holds for us in the future, is, and this is where our youthful experience is really very basic and very fundamental, very important. Just as when we were a child, we all felt, everybody experienced childhood in some way or another. And as a child, whether his environment, whether his life was pleasant or not, but it was real. He didn't doubt that this really exists. This sense of reality that one experienced as a child is rooted in the ability of the human being to perceive reality beyond doubt. You follow what I'm saying? Because normally we think that to what extent do I know it? To the extent that I understand it. Not so. There is an extent to which I understand it, and then there is beyond that, beyond my understanding. The sense of reality that we grow up with, that we know from childhood, that same sense of reality, that is rooted in the soul of the human being, of being able to know that his existence and existence of the world is real. And from that reality, he comes to recognize where that reality comes from. Why is it real? Because after all, this world is not really self-sustaining. This is how he gets to know and understand that there is a God in the world. Because he sees that the reality of the world is actually more profound than the world itself. It seems to be real on the one hand, and the other hand is so precarious. It's so vulnerable in itself. And therefore, this brings a person to recognize and open his mind and heart to recognize that that the true reality is in fact in Amunah, is in fact in something greater and higher than the world itself. Up until a certain time, his reality is based on the world, and then he goes out beyond it, and he sees that the world itself is not the basis for reality. The basis of reality is that which makes the world. And thus, he can come into Yidishkait, into Torah, and the Torah begins right in the beginning. You should know that the reality of the world is not a self-made reality. That's the very first words of the Torah. And he can relate to it perfectly. Like I pointed out many times in our talks, that when you learn Chumash with a child, and you tell him, "Bereshis bara Elokim hashamayim v'ha'aretz," no child ever came up with the question, "Really? Really? This world was made? I thought it was real." Never a question. Because he relates very dynamically to this. Because the world is so real, it's more real than the world itself. Then it can sustain reality on its own. And therefore, see, this is the point. Therefore, the reality that we come into, and the way we learn Torah, the way we do mitzvahs, is really based on the very same perception that makes us relate simply to our house in which we were born. Because it's the same basic truth, it's the same basis. So even though this is something that we learned later on and we don't know very much about it, this is all on the intellectual level. But in terms of experiencing it, in terms of being able to relate to it, feeling at home with it, and feeling that this is a reality that I feel comfortable, that I feel not a stranger to it, that something that I know only to a certain extent, that I have to take and always make sense of, that's not necessary. To whatever extent I understand it is immaterial. It does not limit my ability to relate to it. Because what I'm relating to is not the physical action, or the physical place, or the physical time. What I'm relating to is that which makes it real. Because I recognize that the physical world and all the special of time, it doesn't make itself. There's something behind it. So when it comes, okay, so much for this. I want to now kind of, on the basis of this recognition, point out a few areas where this gives us guidance in terms of how we relate to it and how we face it. And as I mentioned before, one of the principal things is our own future. Everyone here has a future different than the present. Because everyone here is just here at a certain, in a transitory situation. You're a student, you learn to whatever degree, to whatever time you have to learn. And clearly there is a very dramatic change in terms of your position in the future. By some people very near future, some people a little bit further future. How do we face the future? And we have to be able to face the future in a wholesome way, in a confident way, in a way that we can both plan for it and not be scared of it. not feel that we're going into the unknown, although it is clearly unknown. It is by this very, on the one hand, very simple, on the other hand, very profound. Profound because intellectually it's very profound. Simple is because to our souls it's very simple. We know that there is a total, a single reality in all existence. No one doubts that. And therefore the future is the same single reality as the present. And that single reality that brought us to this moment, this is what's going to bring us into, this is the reality with which we are going to go into the future. And this is why it is possible for us sitting here, not knowing what our future is, and clearly, as I said, we need to, there is going to be changes, and yet we can completely indulge and delve into our current activities, delve into our current learning, just maintain, as we speak all the time, maintain this dorim, learn as best as we can, without any concern of the future. Not because we are irresponsible, not because we are not wise enough to know that there's a future to be prepared for, but because the future is just as real as the present. And if the present demands that this is what we do, this is the best thing, we can do it wholeheartedly, without any fear, because the future is not a strange unknown. It's not a mystery. It's unknown to our intellect, but it is known to our souls. It exists. You will observe, you go into a yeshiva, a regular yeshiva. They have bochrim over there. I'm talking about the higher classes, let's say 22, 23, 24. And they sit and learn seemingly without any concern. With full heart and full mind. And you wouldn't think, but the world from outside will say, hey, these are people who are not real. Why aren't they preparing for what's going to happen a year from now? The answer is they are preparing for what's happening a year from now. They are strengthening themselves. They're getting a more profound understanding of what Yidishkait is. And the future is going to be carried just the way it was brought into the present. And they will face it when it comes. But when it comes, they'll face it with the same confidence and full-heartedness as they're facing now. And when you face the future, when it comes, with confidence, then you have all your faculties, all your intellect, all your strength with you, and you can accomplish in a relatively short time that which without recognizing it can take years and years to accomplish. We have, just to illustrate this point, we have bochrim learning in the yeshiva. I'm talking about learning with full diligence, without playing games. Full diligence to the day of their wedding. They get married and they go to the kollel for whatever period of time, a short period of time, half a year, a year. and then they go out on shlichus. And what prepared them for the shlichus? They didn't go to college. Their English is Olatera English. It's really Yinglish. And in terms of worldly orientation, to understand what a business is, what a businessman is, they're total strangers to it. They know one thing, that they're not going into a different world. It's the same Hashem's world. And if it's Hashem's world, they know Hashem's world. They will understand the person, at the level where he is when they need to understand him. Because he's not a stranger. No one will come to them and say, I made myself. No human being made himself. Every human being was made by Hashem. And they know what a human being is. And they can assess a human being at every level. And within a short time, they're part of the community where they moved into. Everybody understands them, they understand everybody. And everybody associates with them. And on top of that, they become orators, they become great speakers, and they become writers in no time. Why? Because they feel at home wherever they go. That's the important thing. They feel at home, perfectly at home, wherever they go. And the reason they feel at home wherever they go is that Hashem Echad, because the same home, the same basis that sustained where they come from, that's where they came to. That's the same basis for where they came to. It's the same Rebbeinu Shalom, the same God. They never feel being in a strange land. They don't feel ever a loss. And the experience that I've seen, their world affairs and the whole world, all people, what happened over here, how's it going to peter out, and what does it mean, and so forth. And when this simple Indian man presents his view, everybody's astounded and saying, oh, it really makes sense. It really makes sense. Because it touches the core, because everybody really recognizes that there is the reality that Torah recognizes. And it really makes sense. In short, just in the summary, I want to just make clear, although in order to know Torah we have to learn, and it doesn't come easy, and there is a whole world that does not know of Torah. In fact, the Torah only substantiates that which we inherently know. And the Torah only says that the same simple reality, the same simple relationship that you have as a child with your playroom, and you felt comfortable with it, you should know that same simple reality is true wherever you go. Because there's no question about this reality. It's not a strange thing that there is another continent, there's another world. There's not a strange thing, because the same creator who made this made that. So therefore, what is the bottom message? The bottom message, number one, we should, and we have to, we are able to get a perfectly comfortable relationship to Yidishkait, to Torah, even though we are complete novices and complete newcomers to it. And we have to get that because that's what we're going to live with. And we have to live with comfort and wholesomeness. And the second point is that we must not be scared of the future. The future is the present and the past. The same basics, the same base for it. It's not something that happens by itself. It doesn't happen by itself. Just like the present, we all understand is sustained by the Creator. And the past was sustained by the Creator. The future is sustained by the Creator. And is brought on by the Creator. By the basic truth that we believe, that we know is true. And thus, when we are in the present, we can, whatever moment we have, if we have 1 hour to learn, we have a day to learn, we have a year to learn, whatever time we have, we can learn without any concern, without any fear that we're missing something out. Whatever we do it right. This is the right thing to do. Do it 100%. That's the way then we feel comfortable. That's the way we bring our whole selves into it. That's how our learning becomes enriched. There's one point that is made in the Rishima of the Frierdiker Rebbe, I believe, where he says that was a very interesting phenomenon, interesting observation, that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, when needed to travel, and traveling in those days was not an easy thing, and he prepared it was a lot big effort, and for him traveling Bichlal wasn't easy. And he said the one interesting observation is that up to the moment when he had to get up and go, you couldn't tell on him at all any kind of dislodging, any kind of anxiety. He was completely in what he was doing up to the moment when he had to go. The time came, and let's go. Because the future and the present and the past are all one. One time, Reb Zalman Butman of Hashem told me that he was in France when our Rebbe was there. When the Rebbe came to meet his mother. That was in 45, I think. And they arranged for a meeting in his house. Zalman Butman lived in midtown Paris, and he had a nice apartment. And there was a meeting arranged. Then various askonim, various public figures to meet, and the Rebbe was supposed to be at that meeting. And everybody got there on time, and the Rebbe wasn't there. So, the Rebbe himself told me the story. So he was anxious. Maybe the Rebbe, it's a strange city after all. Maybe he lost his way, he lost the address, whatever. So he went outside to look around. And as he's running, he sees the Rebbe walking. And the Rebbe was walking, calmly, step by step, very like intelligently, very self-contained. So the Zalman walks up to the Rebbe and he says, everybody is there already, everybody is waiting. So the Rebbe looked at his watch. He says, there's another 3 minutes. There's another 3 minutes. The point is, what's so exciting about it? When the time comes, that's when you do it. You have to be anxious way ahead of the time. Right now, I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing it. I'm busy doing something else. When that time comes, I'll do that. The bottom line is, we are here where we are in reality. Confidently, full-heartedly, and that's the source, that's the secret of success. So, that's love.
You say that sometimes being anxious about something would actually help if you're working for some kind of goal. When you reach that goal, you're anxious to reach that goal, that you basically would work better or more, more intense in order to reach that goal.
Yeah, there is that. But this is in terms of provoking your intellect and your emotion, you know what I'm saying, to get you excited to do it. But it is not. So in that respect, it is a positive force, to reach the goal and so forth. But if you say that if you don't reach the goal, then the world will come apart, that's not conducive to success. You see what I'm saying? It's conducive to success only if you call forth the whole person. You understand? Not just this fear of failure. Then it's not conducive.
Practically speaking, what would you recommend, for example, with various things in the world? If you something focused on what you're doing right now, you are worried about the future and what's going to happen in a day or two, what's going to happen further on. What practical can be done at this moment in time itself? There's practical that can be done to not to worry about the future.
Well, to worry about the future, as I said, is off the table. To plan and when the time comes when it is appropriate to plan for it, yes, you make a plan, and then you stop worrying. That's what I'm saying, because it's a reality. Future is also reality. You will adjust the plan as time goes on. You're not blind and saying, I'm going blindly. You'll adjust the plan as time goes on. How is a plan done? And the plan is, you plan, and then you plan a path for execution. And at every step, you judge whether it's going in that direction. The important point that I'm trying to make is that it's all done without fear. It has to be done with confidence. And if you want to have a plan and you want a path to the plan, it does not mean that the other times, because you're in the middle of a plan and you're concerned about the plan, so the other times that you cannot do anything about this plan, you cannot do anything either. You're so concerned, you're so taken up that your whole person is destroyed. You know what I'm saying? The concern that's not conducive to success at all. Success comes with consideration and planning, but having a full confidence in it. Right? When you have to wrestle, when you used to wrestle, Hashem, this is behind you. Right? Wrestling requires strength, right? Physical strength. But that's not all. You have to be completely into it. If you're not completely into it, it won't work. Right? The same thing is true when it comes to learning. It's not enough just to learn. You have to feel at home in it and be into it. By being into it, you absorb something that you cannot put your finger on, more than what you learn. You absorb the overall truth about it, something that you can't even put a finger on. You can't account for it. When you step into Torah, Torah becomes your reality. Not just something that you know, but this is a reality. Totally richer experience. Totally.
You have to learn how to get into it. Right? Sometimes, let's say if you're studying something that's not really, you just cannot interest you, or you find that it's not.
The first thing when you go to learn, understand what you're saying, it has an interest, that's a good question. But, generally speaking, it's definitely much easier and much better to learn what you are interested in. But if you find that you're not interested in this, and you have to learn it, remember that this is Hashem's Torah. And essentially, you are learning Hashem's thought rather than these particular words. And you relate to that at that level. I'm not saying that it doesn't make a difference. I mean, only for very great people that makes a difference what they learn. But for us simpleton, yes, if I'm interested, it draws me more. Nevertheless, it is still possible, that's my point, it's still possible to be involved, because then because if you relate to its basic truth rather than to the intellectual challenge. I learned Rambam. The Rambam, by all accounts, was a superhuman genius. A very, very deep thinker. Besides that, he had enormous memory, quote unquote. He had a very deep thinker. He wrote philosophical books. Very minute dichotomy, breaking down into points and all that. And you look at this Sefer, he goes into such detail and he say, I'm bored learning it. How did he have the patience to go through this and mark it all down? To Rambam made no difference. Every word was holy.